There's a certain kind of silence that falls when you walk out to your driveway and find nothing but an oil stain where your Jeep used to be. Not the good kind of silence like after fresh snow. The kind that tightens in your chest while your brain sprints through 1,000 possibilities, none of them sane. I just stood there, keys in hand, coffee half sipped, staring at the empty concrete like it was going to apologize. But the real punch to the gut came 20 minutes later, when I called the towing company and they told me exactly who had ordered the tow. It was an HOA request. The name listed is Karen Wentley. Now, I don't live in an HOA. That's the first thing. My house is on a private road, just outside the suburban hellscape known as Clearwater Estate. I bought the property years ago. 3 acres, no restrictions, no dues, and certainly no nosy middle-aged tyrants with clipboards. But somehow, this woman had managed to get my personal vehicle removed from my own land. And the kicker? She lived 2 blocks away, over the invisible border where the HOA rulebook ruled lives like some suburban Bible. I hadn't even met her, and yet she'd reached into my life like it was her job. So I paid the impound fee, got my Jeep back, scratched, by the way, and drove straight to Clearwater Estates with one purpose: to find Karen. You'd think someone named Karen Wentley would be hard to identify in a neighborhood like that, but no. She made it easy. Big house, white trim, faux classical columns, a flag that read "Love it or leave," and a no trespassing sign zip-tied to her mailbox. She also happened to be standing in the yard screaming at a landscaper for trimming her hydrangeas, 1 inch too short. She looked like someone who peaked in a community theater production of Steel Magnolias and never came down. I introduced myself, politely, told her I was the guy whose Jeep she'd had towed. Her eyes lit up with this deranged sparkle like I'd just confirmed her place in the universe. "Oh," she said, adjusting her wraparound sunglasses, "you mean the abandoned vehicle? The one violating aesthetic harmony of the cul-de-sac." I pointed out that it wasn't in her cul-de-sac, or under her jurisdiction, or, frankly, any of her business. She shrugged, grinned, and told me, "That road doesn't have an official street name on county records." I looked. "That means it's not registered. Which means it's not private. Which means I can file an HOA nuisance claim." "You're welcome." I wanted to laugh, but the kind of laugh that sounds like breaking glass. I left before I said something criminal. Back home, I pulled up the plat maps, survey filings, and deed history from my property folder. My road was clearly designated as a private easement with recorded rights dating back to the 1960s. It had never once been part of Clearwater Estates or any association. But Karen had found a loophole, or at least something she could call a loophole, and apparently that was enough to make a towing company jump. Over the next 2 weeks, things got weirder. A cease and desist letter showed up in my mailbox, written in Comic Sans, telling me to remove unapproved structures from my lot. The structure in question was my chicken coop. Then came the flyers about Community Trash Day, printed with HOA logos and slipped under my door. One morning, a random teenager in an orange vest knocked and said he was here to measure my fencing line. When I asked who sent him, he just shrugged and mumbled, "The HOA lady," before leaving on a lime scooter. The worst part? Karen was getting bolder. She started walking up the edge of my yard, snapping pictures with her phone like she was documenting war crimes. One afternoon, I caught her poking around my shed. When I confronted her, she said she was checking for compliance violations. I asked her to show a badge or leave. She told me she was the badge. That's when I knew she wasn't just a nuisance, she was a problem with teeth. And if she could manipulate a towing company into seizing my vehicle, what else could she do with the wrong paperwork and the right bluff? I needed leverage. Not a restraining order. Not a neighborhood petition. Real leverage. So I dug deep. I started with the Clearwater Estates HOA board. It was a 5-member operation run out of a converted guest room in one of their houses. I showed up to a public budget meeting and sat in the back, unnoticed, while Karen delivered a 10-minute tirade about garbage bins and unruly grass. Afterward, I shook hands, asked questions, smiled like I wanted to volunteer. One of the board members, a twitchy guy named Dennis, mentioned they were switching to a new security contractor for the HOA patrols. He even gave me the name. That was the thread I pulled. Turns out, Clearwater Estates had been using federal grant money, intended for neighborhood crime prevention initiatives, to pay private contractors. That in itself wasn't illegal. But the contracts were fake. The patrols? Never happened. The money? Diverted into shell accounts. And the company name Karen submitted on the invoices? Didn't exist. It was a fabricated LLC registered under her brother's name, which, by the way, he didn't even know about. That changed everything. I sat on the information for 1 week, watched her strut around the neighborhood like a suburban dictator, issuing warnings to people about mailbox sizes and porch lights. I let her serve me one more fine, this time for hazardous terrain, because my gravel driveway had too many loose stones. Then I made a phone call. Not to the police. Not to a lawyer. I called an old college friend who now works for a federal agency. Let's just say he's very good at tracing funds. And very interested in grant fraud, especially when it involves community security programs. Within 5 days, a case was opened. Within 10, they had the bank statements. And within 3 weeks, a sealed indictment was ready. I didn't plan for the FBI to roll in with a task force, but apparently the HOA's shady finances reached a lot farther than anyone knew. Karen had dragged in other board members. They'd used the HOA as their own personal slush fund. Inflated invoices, fake improvements, even billing the government for security cameras that were never installed. When they showed up, it wasn't just to tow her authority, it was to tow the entire operation. The day they arrived, Karen was hosting an enforcement tea on her front lawn. There were scones, tiny flags, and folding chairs arranged in a semicircle of passive aggression. She was in the middle of explaining how she personally broke up a mailbox smuggling ring when the first black SUV rolled up. The thing about watching someone like Karen implode is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's not like a building collapsing. It's more like a glittering chandelier dropping one crystal at a time until gravity yanks the whole thing down. And on that morning, as the black Suburbans lined up like chess pieces in front of her colonial-themed house, I knew the final yank was coming. I parked at the edge of my own property, Jeep safely tucked in my newly installed garage, complete with 4 surveillance cameras and motion-activated floodlight. Karen had made me paranoid. Now she was about to find out what it felt like to be watched. Across the way, a few HOA loyalists stood frozen on sidewalks, mouths open like tourists witnessing history. One guy with a dog and no leash literally stopped mid-walk and never moved again. I don't even think the dog blinked. From the lead SUV stepped 2 men in dark suit. No sunglasses, no talking. Just a slow, deliberate walk toward Karen's patriotic snack table, where a stack of printed violation slips sat next to a 3-tiered tray of lemon bars. Karen spotted them and squared her shoulders like she was ready to issue a citation for bad posture. "Gentlemen," she called out with that sugar-glazed condescension she reserved for people she assumed were beneath her but could still be useful. "If you're here about the unpermitted gazebo on Lot 14, I've already filed the report. You can forward any updates to me directly. I'm HOA President Karen Wentley." The shorter agent pulled out a small leather badge holder and opened it in one smooth motion. "Ma'am, we're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're here to execute a federal warrant regarding financial misconduct under Title 18 of the U.S. Code." His voice was quiet, dry, and final. He could have said he was there to repossess her patio furniture, and it would have carried the same weight. Karen blinked. You could almost see her brain flipping through legal terms like flashcards, looking for the right comeback. Excuse me? This is clearly a mistake. This is private property, and you have no jurisdiction here." This is an HOA matter. The taller agent raised an eyebrow like he'd heard this before. The HOA is the subject of the investigation, ma'am. We're not here because of a complaint. We're here because your HOA has misused federal funds, submitted fraudulent invoices, and laundered money through ghost contractors linked to your household. The phrase, your household, hit her like a slap made of words. Her smile faltered, and she clutched the edge of her little folding table for support. Till she tried. This is ridiculous. We're a volunteer board. We provide safety and order for this community. There must be some misunderstanding. That's when they handed her the indictment packet, thick, stapled, and filled with more tabs than a tax audit. Her fingers shook as she held it, flipping through the first few pages. I could see from across the street the color draining from her face. The man beside her, Dennis, the treasurer, if I remembered right, looked like he was trying to melt into the bushes. The agents didn't wait for a confession. They gestured toward the SUVs, where 3 more federal officers stepped out, this time in blue jackets. They began taping off Karen's front porch with yellow caution tape. Behind them, other agents fanned out toward the HOA clubhouse down the street. Word spread fast. Within minutes, homeowners started pouring out of their houses, phones raised, recording everything. A couple of teenagers climbed a tree to get a better view. I couldn't help but smirk. Karen's voice cracked. You can't just. This is a mistake. I have rights. I am the HOA. No, ma'am, the agent said as he turned toward her. You were the HOA. And your board is currently suspended pending federal review. By noon, Karen's house was swarming with agents. Her office, if you can call a room with 5 white boards and color-coded HOA maps an office, was being combed through. They took her computers, her printer, and even the HOA-branded pens. Meanwhile, down at the clubhouse, they opened a locked cabinet filled with HOA records going back 10 years. Turns out Karen had a habit of rewriting minutes from meetings that never happened, then billing the HOA for event costs. The events included things like emergency fence assessment, trash bin beautification, and my personal favorite, community security dog patrol demo, which was apparently just her niece's golden retriever running around in a vest. Dennis cracked under pressure within 2 hours. Said he had no idea the shell companies were fake. Claimed Karen had shown him paperwork that looked real. The secretary, a woman named Glenda, insisted she'd just signed what they told her to. The vice president ghosted everyone, packed a suitcase and drove off before agents reached his house. They caught up to him at a motel 2 towns over, hiding behind a potted plant in the lobby. By late afternoon, the HOA was officially dissolved by emergency court order, and I watched it all unfold with the calm of someone who'd planned this like a chess game. Every document I'd submitted, every financial record traced, every inch of HOA red tape unraveled. Karen had taken a personal vendetta over a Jeep and used it to launch an empire of petty tyranny. And now that empire was a pile of ash. You'd think that'd be the end. But no. Karen, still delusional, held a press conference on her lawn the next day. She stood in front of a cell phone mounted on a tripod and streamed herself live to 37 Facebook followers. This is a deep state hit job, she declared. They're afraid of what I uncovered in this neighborhood. I have files. I have proof. They want to silence strong suburban women. Then she tried to invoke the Fifth Amendment mid-rant, while not actually under questioning. The comments under her livestream were a mix of high school classmates calling her still nuts, and bored locals asking if the HOA pool was open now that it was a federal crime scene. One guy asked if he could move his mailbox back now that the regime has fallen. I couldn't resist. I commented from a burner account, "You towed the wrong Jeep, Karen." She blocked me 30 seconds later. The fallout was glorious. Without the HOA, Clearwater Estates turned into a free-for-all. People tore down their beige fences and repainted their shutters with actual colors. Someone started parking a boat in their front yard. Another neighbor opened a hot dog stand in his driveway, complete with umbrellas and a tip jar. A sign read, "Now that Karen's gone, grab a dog and be free." But what really made me laugh? The day I got a letter from the county zoning board. Turns out my property line had been contested years ago by Clearwater Estates during a development project. The HOA had buried the paperwork, but now that the board was dismantled, the oversight came to light. And guess what? That unregistered road Karen tried to claim wasn't just mine. It technically ran through a chunk of land the HOA thought they owned. That meant the clubhouse, the actual building, was sitting partially on my land, which meant it was mine now. And trust me, I had plans for it. It's amazing how quiet a place gets when the queen's been dethroned. In the days after the FBI sweep, Clearwater Estates felt like a ghost town that got hit by a confetti cannon. The strict hedges grew wild, lawn flamingos multiplied like rabbits, and porch lights of all wattages blinked into defiant life. For the first time in years, the neighborhood actually looked lived in. The tyranny of beige was over. But I wasn't celebrating just yet. I was busy measuring square footage. See, the county clerk's office had sent me a curious little packet after the investigation blew the lid off the HOA's buried skeletons. Inside was an updated property map with a bright red outline showing the legal boundaries of my land, including, surprise surprise, a sliver of real estate right underneath the Clearwater Estates HOA clubhouse. Not adjacent. Not close to. Underneath. Now, the clubhouse wasn't some grand marble structure. It was a squat, one-story stucco building with faded blue shutters and a cracked parking lot. But it was sacred ground to people like Karen. They held board meetings there, threw HOA picnics, and more importantly, stored decades of neighborhood power in those four moldy walls. The same walls now partially sitting on my land without an easement. Which meant I had a choice. I could demand rent. I could issue a cease and desist. I could even bulldoze it. But that's not how you finish a game like this. Not when someone like Karen's been playing with your pieces. No, I had something better in mind, something poetic. Something she'd never see coming, because it operated in the one language she never learned: community goodwill. I started by contacting a local nonprofit that helped returning veterans with mental health support and job reintegration. They'd been looking for an affordable office and group meeting space for months. I told them they could have the building for $1 a year. No red tape. No fine print. I'd even cover utilities for 6 months. All I asked was that they do whatever renovations they wanted, and host one big open house barbecue. They thought I was kidding. I wasn't. We signed the paperwork 2 days later. Next, I called a contractor friend and told him to get the permits rolling. He asked if I wanted it remodeled. I said no, I wanted it rebranded. New sign, new paint, new purpose. He laughed, called me a genius, and said he'd waive half the labor just to watch it unfold. Within a week, the clubhouse had been scrubbed of all traces of HOA glory. The Clearwater Estates Administrative Center sign came down. In its place, bold and proud, the Clearwater Welcome Center for Veterans and Families. The change sent shockwaves. The Facebook groups lit up like a brushfire. The HOA loyalists, what few remained, freaked out. But the majority? They loved it. The neighborhood that had been micromanaged into misery was suddenly buzzing with real neighborly energy. People were pitching in to repaint sidewalks, volunteering to help at the center, even organizing events that didn't require approval forms in triplicate. Karen, meanwhile, had gone radio silent. After her live stream meltdown, she vanished from public view. Rumor was she'd hired a lawyer who immediately advised her to stop talking, stop posting, and stop whatever she was still doing with her fake LLC. A few neighbors claimed they saw her crying in her SUV in the early mornings, parked at the far end of the cul-de-sac like a ghost haunting her own empire. Part of me pitied her. The other part? Let's just say I slept great every night. Of course, she couldn't stay quiet forever. That's not how Karens operate. One afternoon, as I was helping haul in chairs for the Veteran Center's open house, a sleek black Lexus pulled up on the edge of the lot. Out stepped Karen, dressed in a navy blue pantsuit like she was headed to a courtroom she hoped to intimidate into submission. Her expression was carved from stone. "Excuse me," she called out to no one in particular, "I need to speak with the property owner." I turned around, dusted off my hands, and smiled like the cat who'd not only eaten the canary but got a refund for the feathers. "That'd be me. Welcome back." She gave me a look that could curdle milk. "You can't just hand over our building. That property was under HOA management for 20 years. We paid for it, maintained it. That structure belongs to the community." I gestured around to the dozen volunteers hauling picnic tables, stringing lights, laughing like actual humans. "You're right. And now it is the community's." She took a step forward, legal papers clutched tight in one hand. "I have documentation. I'll sue you for fraudulent transfer of assets. This is theft." I nodded. "Sure. But see, I didn't transfer anything. The land is mine. The building is yours, what's left of it. But since there's no legal easement on file, and your dissolved HOA doesn't exist anymore, the only thing connecting you to this place is your car's GPS history." Her lip twitched. "You're not going to get away with this." I leaned in just slightly. "Get away with what?" "Hosting a support group for veterans." Karen stormed off, tossing the legal papers onto the nearest bench like they were going to self-enforce. She didn't even stay for the free ribs. But the kicker? A few days later, I got a visit from a man in a rumpled suit and an outdated Bluetooth headset. He introduced himself as a crisis brand consultant. Apparently Karen had hired him to restore her public image. He asked if I'd consider publicly acknowledging a miscommunication, maybe even suggest on social media that I had misunderstood her intentions and regret the escalation. I offered him a soda and politely suggested he run, not walk, back to wherever they keep the reputation rehab kits. He left with a full cooler of Capri Suns, which I considered a small victory. By the end of the month, the Welcome Center was thriving. Local businesses donated supplies. The community pitched in for a new AC unit. A mural went up on the west wall, a sweeping painting of the neighborhood as it could be, not as it was. The irony? The design was based on sketches found in Karen's old HOA office, labeled Community Vision. She'd dreamed of building something unifying. She just tried to do it with fines and power trips instead of people. But perhaps the final poetic nail came during the town's annual zoning review. The planning board, in light of recent governance failures in Clearwater Estates, voted to formally reclassify the neighborhood as a non-HOA district. That's right. No more HOA. Ever. The bylaws were declared null and void. The board disbanded. The entire institution wiped clean off the county books like it had never existed. And guess who they asked to help draft the new community charter? Yeah, me. They even gave me a plaque. It hangs in my kitchen, right above the spot where I used to leave Karen's warning notices. The plaque says, "For services rendered in the liberation of Clearwater Estates." Karen still lives in the neighborhood, though she's rarely seen. Her lawn's grown wild. Her hydrangeas are dead. Someone spotted her trying to hand out flyers once, but nobody took one. There's talk that she might move, start fresh somewhere new. But wherever she goes, she'll always know she picked a fight over a Jeep. And lost everything. She just didn't know the guy she towed owned more than a driveway. He owned the long game. But if you think that's the final twist, you haven't heard what showed up in my mailbox 2 weeks later. Let's just say Karen's war wasn't quite over. The envelope was oversized, heavy, and reeked of desperation. It arrived 2 weeks after the Clearwater Veterans Welcome Center hosted its first neighborhood-wide movie night, which drew more than 100 residents. We played The Sandlot on a borrowed projector, grilled hot dogs, and laughed like people unlearning trauma. For one brief evening, suburban peace actually meant something. So naturally, it made perfect sense that I'd find a thick, crinkled envelope with a gold-foiled seal on my doorstep the very next morning, hand-delivered and unsigned. Inside was a cease and desist letter. But not just any letter. This one had Karen's fingerprints all over it, even if her name appeared nowhere. It came from a brand new legal entity called the Clearwater Heritage Society, an alleged non-profit formed to protect the historical integrity and governance values of the original community vision. The document accused me of illegally commandeering a community institution, defacing it, and creating an atmosphere of unregulated populism detrimental to neighborhood unity. I had to read that sentence 3 times just to absorb the full absurdity of it. Unregulated populism? Was I running a barbecue or inciting a revolution? At the bottom of the letter, in fine print, was the name of the filing attorney, Marla K. Wentley, ESQ. Karen had given herself a law degree. I checked the bar registry. There was no such lawyer in the state. I checked other states. Nothing. Karen had created her own legal-sounding letterhead, complete with a fake P.O. box and a phone number that went straight to voicemail. It was a shell. Just like her fake security company, just like the fraudulent HOA invoices. Only this time, it wasn't about money. It was about pride. She'd lost everything else. Her board, her power, her reputation. Now she was trying to claw back relevance through the only tool she had left. Legal theater. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I forwarded it to the same federal agent who'd opened the initial case file. His reply was short, "We're watching her. This help. Thanks." The next move came 3 days later. The Veterans Center was hit with a surprise inspection from the county code office. A clipboard-carrying man in khakis showed up with a grim face and a checklist. "We received an anonymous tip about structural hazards, unlicensed remodeling, and improper use of zoning permits," he said without blinking. I offered him coffee and walked him through every inch of the building. He found nothing. In fact, he ended up taking pictures. Not for evidence, but for best practices to show other community centers. Before leaving, he asked who had filed the tip. I didn't answer. He nodded anyway and muttered, "Figured." Then came the social media campaign. A new Facebook page popped up, Clearwater Truth Network. It posted grainy photos of the center, claiming the veteran BBQs were actually political rallies in disguise. One post warned that our Sunday pancake breakfasts were a front for radical anti-regulatory agendas. It even accused us of harboring roaming wildlife, because someone spotted a stray cat under a lawn chair. The page had 3 followers. All of them were fake accounts. I recognized one of the profile pictures. It was Karen's old Yorkie, Cinnamon, photoshopped into a business suit. I reported the page, laughed, and let it die in obscurity. But I also realized something important. Karen wasn't just unhinged, she was running out of rope and flailing hard. The final blow she tried to land came in the form of a zoning petition. She submitted it to the County Development Board with over 200 printed signatures, requesting that my land and the Welcome Center be annexed into a newly proposed HOA district she called Clearwater Traditional. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The board reviewed the petition and did what any rational government office would do: verified the signatures. Of the 212 names submitted, 126 were proven to be duplicate. 57 were entirely made up, names like Jameson Burgerstein and Linda Hologram. 4 signatures belonged to deceased residents. One was simply, "Your mom." The board flagged it for fraud. And since Karen used the same email address she'd once used for HOA filings, the same one tied to her brother's fake LLC, it triggered an automatic review under the still-open federal case. I got a call from my friend at the agency again. "She really doesn't know how to stop, does she?" No, she didn't. But I wasn't going to let her drag the community down with her. So I did something unexpected. I invited her to a meeting. Not a public one. Not a roast. A private sit-down. Just her and me. I sent the invitation by certified mail. One Karen couldn't ignore or claim didn't arrive. I wrote one sentence. 1 hour. Just you and me. No cameras. No witnesses. Let's talk. She showed up 5 minutes late wearing sunglasses indoors, the international uniform for delusion. Her posture was stiff, but her expression tried to feign control. If this is about the petition, she started, my lawyer. No lawyers, I interrupted. No recordings. Just us. We sat in the empty welcome center, across a plastic folding table. The walls were lined with military memorabilia, family photos, and thank you cards from local veterans. It smelled like old coffee and fresh paint. She looked around with a sneer. You really think this is going to last? I leaned back. It already has. But this isn't about winning. I brought you here to give you an out. Her mouth twitched. What kind of out? You step away. Quietly. No more fake organizations. No more letters. No more petitions. You move on. Leave Clearwater. You'll still face consequences for the fraud, but maybe, just maybe, the judge sees you're done trying to escalate. Or what? I looked her dead in the eyes. Or you keep pushing, and I make sure every single attempted stunt gets logged, filed, and submitted as evidence of ongoing harassment. I have the time, I have the connections, and now I have the community. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen didn't have a comeback. She stared at the ceiling for a full 30 seconds. Then, without a word, she stood up and left. The next day, the fake Facebook page vanished. No more envelopes came. No new heritage societies were formed. Karen listed her house for sale within the week. Rumor was she was moving in with her sister 3 counties over. A quiet exit, wrapped in delusion and defeat. But the story didn't end there. Not for me and not for Clearwater. The Welcome Center expanded. We added a therapy room, a computer lab, and even partnered with local schools for tutoring programs. Kids came to learn. Veterans came to talk. Neighbors came to volunteer. What was once a clubhouse of control became a sanctuary of purpose. Karen's name faded from memory, but her cautionary tale didn't. And just when I thought everything had finally settled, I received a curious phone call from a local news reporter. She was working on a segment about community corruption turned transformation. She wanted an interview. I figured sure, why not? But what she said at the end made my skin prickle. Did you know someone else recently tried to file a property claim on your land? She asked. The name on the application wasn't Karen, but it was someone linked to her fake LLC. You might want to see this. Apparently, Karen wasn't done after all. If you think that twist caught me off guard, wait till Chapter 5. Because the final play in this game? That was mine. When you've lived through a full-scale HOA implosion, an FBI investigation, fake nonprofits, zoning wars, and ghost law firms, you start to develop a sixth sense for nonsense. So when the reporter mentioned a property claim tied to Karen's defunct LLC, I didn't panic. I went still, like the moment before a chess master sacrifices a queen. Because if Karen was crawling out of whatever shadow she'd slithered into, it meant she had either lost her mind completely, or she still thought she could win. The claim she'd filed, technically, someone using her brother's old shell company, wasn't on my house or driveway. No, she'd tried to be clever this time. It was on a narrow strip of land behind the Welcome Center that had historically been left unpaved and unmarked. Just over 30 feet wide, the sliver ran along the back fence, overgrown with vines and forgotten construction debris. On paper, it looked like a clerical ghost, something that might have been overlooked in an early survey or boundary update. And someone had tried to declare it abandoned municipal land, ripe for acquisition under an obscure state statute. But here's where Karen tripped over her own arrogance again. See, while she thought I only owned the Welcome Center parcel, she didn't realize I'd purchased the adjoining lot 6 months earlier under my LLC. Quietly, legally, and absolutely recorded with the county under my name. The land she was trying to claim? Already mine. She hadn't just filed a fake claim. She'd filed a fraudulent property seizure on land that was fully deeded and taxed under a legitimate owner. And that, in legal terms, is a felony. I called the same federal agent I'd worked with before. He groaned audibly when I explained the situation. "She's still at it?" he muttered. "Like a cockroach that learned Adobe Acrobat," I replied. He told me to forward all the documentation. I did, along with screenshots from the original LLC formation, the fraudulent deed filing, and the names of the notary and witness she'd used, both of which didn't exist. The response time was faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, Karen's name, and her brother's, were reflagged in the system. The U.S. Attorney's Office amended the original indictment to include attempted property fraud, falsifying legal filings, and obstruction of justice. They didn't even call her first. This time they just showed up. She was arrested while pulling out of a storage unit. They found boxes in the back of her SUV full of fake deed templates, notarized stamps she'd ordered online, and a stack of folders labeled things like Plan B, Public Redemption, and, most hilariously, the Restoration of Order. I saw the arrest footage on a local news clip. Her face looked like someone who had lost the ability to separate fantasy from reality. And while Karen sat in a holding cell awaiting arraignment, I was asked to testify. I didn't have to. They had more than enough evidence to bury her. But I said yes anyway. I wanted to close the book myself. When I walked into that courthouse, it felt surreal. The same Karen who once stood on her porch and barked orders at leaf blowers was now seated in a wrinkled beige jumpsuit, flanked by a public defender who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Karen didn't make eye contact. She stared at the table like it might offer her a trapdoor out of the mess she'd created. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a glare sharp enough to shave ice, gave me the floor. I spoke calmly. Clearly. No emotion. Just facts. I walked through every escalation, beginning with the Jeep she towed, the fake violations, the HOA corruption, the nonprofit scam, and finally, the forged property claim. I ended with a simple sentence. Some people crave power so badly, they'll burn down their own neighborhood to feel tall in the ashes. The courtroom was silent. Karen's defense tried to claim mental exhaustion. Said she was overworked, traumatized, misled by bad advice. But the paper trail was too strong. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was addicted, to control, to revenge, to the illusion of being necessary. And now, finally, she was facing consequences she couldn't manipulate away. The judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, a fine of $50,000, and mandatory psychiatric evaluation. But more importantly, she was permanently barred from serving on any community organization, HOA, or nonprofit board for life. A legal muzzle on her favorite hobby, micromanaging strangers. When I walked out of that courtroom, the sun felt different, like it had waited years to shine this directly. I thought about leaving it there. Just walking away, letting the Welcome Center thrive and never saying her name again. But the community had its own plans. They threw a party, not a petty one but a celebration. Not just for her arrest, but for the rebirth of Clearwater. We grilled burgers, played music, kids drew chalk murals in the parking lot, and someone even brought a karaoke machine. That night, they unveiled something I didn't expect. A metal plaque mounted on the front of the building, right where the old HOA office sign used to hang. It read, "In honor of the day we took our neighborhood back, Clearwater Veterans Welcome Center, established by the people, for the people." They asked me to give a speech. I didn't prepare anything. I just stood there, looking out at all the people who used to live in fear of petty violations and pastel power trips, and I said, "This started because someone towed my Jeep. But it ended with us towing an entire system." The crowd cheered. A few people cried. I just smiled and stepped off the stage. Weeks passed. Then months. Karen faded into a cautionary tale, like a moral fable told at block parties. The Welcome Center expanded even more, adding a food pantry, GED tutoring, even a community garden out back where the old debris lot used to be. One of the veterans carved a wooden bench with a message etched into the back. No more Karens. Only neighbors. And me? I kept the Jeep. Gave it a new paint job, actually. Dark green, with a small decal on the back that read, HOA Recovery Vehicle. People honk when they see it. They know. Every now and then, I still get letters. Residents from other towns, even other states, asking how we did it. How we took down an abusive HOA and built something better. I always say the same thing. Start with truth. Back it with patience. And when it's time, don't fight petty with petty. Fight it with purpose. Because in the end, that's what Karen never understood. She thought she could control people with rules, lies, and fear. But all it really took to end her reign was a man with a Jeep, a file folder, and a long memory. That was the day the HOA learned what real accountability looks like. And Karen? She learned the hard way that when you push the wrong person too far, you don't just lose your position. You lose everything you never had the right to control in the first place.